welcome to this week's episode of the Marina Perry Podcast. This week we have an amazing guest, a very special human, Drew Wild, who is an addiction specialist. And guess what? We're going to unpack addiction. And I'm really excited about this because I actually, I don't always share the view of my guests, but I'm good with that. But in interactions with Drew, I feel very passionately about his mission on this planet, and I'm in full support of it. And I'm sure we may come up with things that I view differently, and we'll dive into that. But what I love about his approach to addiction, as he will share, is he's trying to broaden our awareness around it and understand that actually this is something that likely touches all of our lives. So without any further ado, Drew, welcome to the show today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into this juicy topic of addiction, first question is, if there was an animal that best represented your personality, what would it be and why?
Monkey, 100%.
A monkey?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Came up. Fun-loving, happy, energetic, playful, and it just has a beautiful energy.
Cheeky? Are you a cheeky monkey?
Super cheeky, 100%.
Yeah, I call my girls cheeky.
Take life too seriously. You will never get out alive.
Yes, so true. Okay, and then if you could have a superpower, what superpower would you choose and why?
Teleportation. Yeah.
And if you could teleport anywhere right now, after this podcast, of course, because I know this is your priority and you do not want to be anywhere else, but after this podcast, where would you teleport to?
You know what? Right now, I would teleport home to NZ and I would give my mum a big cuddle.
Has it been a while since you've been back?
Yeah, it's been almost a year. I can't go back without quarantining at the moment, so I'm waiting for that to lift. That's exactly where I'd hop to.
Oh, beautiful. I love New Zealand. I grew up there for a lot of my childhood too. Whereabouts in New Zealand are you from?
I was born in Christchurch. I spent most of my life in Auckland.
Oh.
And I actually, before I moved to the Gold Coast, I lived in Wanaka for 3 years. If you know Wanaka, near Queenstown.
I do. So I when we lived in New Zealand, we lived in Christchurch. Yeah, and it is beautiful. Although I have not seen it after the earthquake, so I can't speak for how it is now. But yeah, in my childhood, I just remember it being such an idyllic, stunning place. I really do feel like New Zealand is, God's country, as in it's just such a peaceful, stunningly, breathtakingly beautiful place, and the nature there is like nothing else. So if you haven't been to New Zealand, go. But in the meantime, Drew, can you share with us, your journey, or what led you to be an addiction specialist? Like, why this and why you? And share that with us if you would.
Sure. It all just comes from experience. All comes from experience. I've spent probably 15 years of my life in the grip of what I would call addiction. I started smoking weed at 11 years old. If I even look before that, I probably had patterns of distraction, and we can go into that a little bit deeper. And that played out for a lot of my teens. Throughout my teenage years, I smoked, I drank. And to be honest with you, I wasn't any different from a lot of the friends I was associating with at the time at all. That was very much the circles I kept, and it was very much the norm. It was what my peers did. We were actually reasonably academic. I did well at school, but I also partied really hard. And it was probably after I came home I did an overseas experience. Just coming home after a year living abroad, thinking I probably was somebody that I wasn't, had a bit of an ego about me. Started hanging out with people who I probably deemed to be sort of in the scene, in the party scene, and sort of the cool kids. And I was actually a very horrible human to a beautiful woman who I was in relationship through my last years of school. We were sort of young love from, 16 to maybe 19, 20. And it was in that separation that it crushed me, broke my heart, absolutely broke my heart. And as a 19-year-old boy, I didn't know what to do with that emotion. I had no idea what to do with that heartbreak. What I knew worked for me was very much to cover up, over the top of, and to numb out and check out and suppress any of that, any feeling, any hurt, any pain that was coming up in that experience. And what I knew that worked really well to do that was to take a lot of drugs, drink a lot of alcohol, and sleep with a lot of different women. And it was a very temporary solution. It was an external solution to a very internal problem. And it spiraled out of control pretty quickly. I ended up in rehab at about 21 years old, coming from basically living in my car. I was driving from dealer to dealer, liquor store to liquor store, at 21 years old, living out of my car, just basically trying to survive. And, from the grace of God, somehow my dad found me, very quickly checked me into rehab. And that was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, really. It was my first taste of sort of personal development or self-development, or just learning a little bit more about myself. But also, I think at that age, I wasn't really willing to put in the work required to heal. It was a lot at that age to think what my life would look like without drugs and alcohol. It was hard to fathom, because that was literally what my environment was built upon, was music and partying. So I remained probably, I guess, clean and sober for, it was sporadic. I'd get maybe 3 months and then another 3 months. And I probably gave it a really good crack for 9 months. And then went through this weird phase of it just being accepted that I drank again. And sort of family and friends didn't question it too much. And I actually started working in the radio industry. I was running events and hosting gigs, things like that, and then started working in the liquor industry. So as you do, as this is the crazy manipulation that I see play out for myself and for other people that lived a lifestyle like I did, to keep these things that have so much become our coping mechanisms in our lives. And that I sat on the merry-go-round for another sort of 8 years. And along the way, I just sat on the cycle. It's the cycle of addiction. I talk about this all the time, which is, insert trigger, insert hurt, insert wound, insert pain. And it could have just been as simple for me as someone messaging me and saying, "Do you want to go for a drink?" And away I would go. I'd go for that drink, and that drink would turn into 10, and then it would go and get a bag. And then, 3-4 days later, maybe a week later, maybe 3 weeks later, I was still going. And then I'd hit bottom. I'd finally hit a point where I'd draw a line in the sand for myself, and I'd have the hard conversation, and depending on how long I'd be going for, find some sort of way to detox myself out of that phase, make all the promises, clean up the wreckage I had created, start eating right, start exercising, honoring my commitments, and then coast. And in that coasting, I got complacent. And complacency was my worst enemy for a very long time. And it was in that coasting and in that complacency that I just start to think I'm all good, and I'm not putting on my armor in the morning, and not doing all the things that fuel and sort of feed my soul. And so then along comes insert trigger once again, and away I go, back down the spiral. And that played out for a very long time. Along the way, my dad passed away, and I never dealt with that properly, never truly grieved. And sure enough, along the way, I was somewhat functional. I sort of held down jobs sporadically, and built a business along the way. I had a somewhat high functioning network marketing business in the health and wellness industry for a time, and won through that a trip to Las Vegas.
I'm picturing the hangover coming. Is this what's happening?
This is exactly what's happening. This is the start of my final demise, as I like to call it. And I made all the promises, I told this is how sneaky my ego can be. I would tell everyone, including myself, that this is fine, this is okay, I can go to Vegas, I've got this. I put everything in place, made sure everyone I was traveling with knew what was going on, knew about my situation, knew what my intention was. And also subconsciously, my whole body knew what was going to play out. And and somehow, in inverted commas for anyone listening right now, is I ended up in Vegas 5 days before anybody else.
Oh dear.
So this happened within 30 minutes of landing. I got in an Uber. He said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "I have no idea. I've never been to Las Vegas in my life." He turns around and looks at me and said, "Bro, do you smoke weed?" I like, at this stage in my life, I didn't mess with weed in ages. Like, by this stage, it's like weed was like this entry level drug. Do you know what I mean? I just looked at him and said, "Oh, bro, I haven't touched weed in ages, but hey, I'm in Vegas. Let's go." He's like, "Man, it's legal here now. Let's roll." Went and got picked up some gummy bears from the dispensary. High as a kite, walking through the casino, and then obviously all the free booze. My inhibitions had dropped. Got drunk within about another 2 hours following that. I had 8 balls of coke, and the party didn't stop for about 14 days. I actually was I was in Vegas for 10. trying to listen to Tony Robbins was our keynote speaker at the conference. I barely remember Tony Robbins, and I came home through Hawaii. It was pretty dangerous actually. I actually had a hire car in Hawaii. I was drink driving all around Hawaii, and came back to New Zealand, where I carried on that behavior for it was probably 2 months. It was probably 2 months of a deep cycle, deep binge, drinking most days. And where I was living in New Zealand, drugs weren't really that accessible. So at that time for me, it was very much alcohol. I was basically waking up, hugging the vodka bottle just to get me through. Like, it was survival. It was like, by this point, when I get to the state of addiction, it's survival. I'm not doing it to get on. I'm not doing it for joy or fun or pleasure. It's like, this is my medicine, and you take this fucking away from me, and like, there's a problem. Because this is what is keeping me alive. This is the only thing I know and have within my space right now that can regulate anything, any sort of torment that's going on within me. And I'm really lucky. I've always had my beautiful, loving, caring mother knew what was going on. Everyone knows what's always going on. And as well as I had a sponsor or a mentor where I lived, who they were sort of in cahoots. They were basically just the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff waiting for me to put my hand up and ask for help. Something I talk about a lot. The people I support today is that, unfortunately, it's really hard to help someone that doesn't want to help themselves. So yeah, they knew that, because they had played this game with me for a very long time. So they were just waiting for me to put my hand up and go, "You know what, I'm done." And I was about 29 years old, and I finally did put my hand up. I messaged Sam, beautiful Sam, and he came, and again, quite quickly, I did a bit of a detox, ended up in rehab for the last time, and something switched. Just energetically, something within me was like, "You know what, I'm done. Like, I am done. I'm done." Like, it was basically, by the time I'd finished, it was life or death. I'm either going to take myself out of the game on purpose or by accident. Like, I had numerous times accidentally. Somehow I managed to pull through, and or I choose to heal. It was a simple reality. The only thing I hadn't tried along this chaotic sort of course of 15 years was actually to do the things that everybody had ever suggested. The only thing I hadn't given a good crack yet. So I thought, fuck it, let's go. Let's actually choose to do something different. Let's go and do all these things that all these people and support groups and mentors and rehabilitation centers have ever suggested to me. And let's see how that works. And so I did. I sort of spent a good year really just laying the foundation of what it meant to be clean and sober, what it meant to live a life without drugs and alcohol. And that was one hell of an experience in itself. And then I probably spent another year just like, what else is there? What else is there? You know, the foundation of my recovery was very much 12-step recovery, but I got hungry for more. You know, I looked around some of these rooms and I thought, God, there's some people with some serious clean time in these rooms, but they look miserable.
Mm.
They look miserable. I don't want that. I don't want to live that existence. What else is there? So, I thankfully through this network marketing business that I had at the time, a deep element of that was associated with personal development, and it just sowed a lot of seeds in growth and expansion. And I saw some amazing things that a lot of people in my space were already doing, and I just kept going, kept expanding, keep working with different mentors, and just kept learning. And got thirsty, probably poured, and probably still do pour a lot of that energy, that addictive energy, into growth these days.
Yeah.
and continue to become the embodiment of the version of self I always wanted to be and see in this world. And that just naturally followed that progression of like that business fell out of alignment for me. It wasn't my truth anymore, and then there was pretty loud screams from the universe that my truth is my story. And that I get to lean into that because, I was surrounded by people still suffering in the grip of addiction. And that has become my calling. I truly believe that I'm put on this planet to change the way we look at and approach addiction. Everything that the systems I was plugged into when I was younger, the support that was offered just wasn't it. It wasn't it. It didn't get to the core of what I truly deem to be the crux of how we approach addiction. And it became really evident that the solutions that have been offered just don't get to the guts of it. And so that's what I truly believe I'm here to sort of reframe and recreate and tear down the fucking stigma attached to that word.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
Let's dive into then, this calling that you have. And I mean, I kind of wrote down a few things actually that I definitely want to touch back on, because you shared a lot of amazing points there that I think we need to unpack. But first off, when you talk about, these processes or our approach to addiction is missing the mark. So what do you think addiction is? And what do you think we see it as? Like, where's the discord in potentially the way society or individuals are relating to this idea of addiction versus what you perceive it to be in reality, having obviously spent a long time?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of sort of what you would see in what's offered these days is a very clinical approach. It's very much based on this sort of what came through in the 50s, this disease-based model, and that if you are an addict, you have a disease. And I just don't deem it to be the truth. I see that, the thing isn't the thing, is sort of the core pillar of what I share with the world, and that it's not the drug. We've got to stop treating the drugs and stop treating the alcohol and stop treating the symptom. Or what has become the coping mechanism. That is all it is. It has simply become the coping mechanism to self-regulate how we feel. And what we need to actually look at is why, not what the addiction, but why the addiction, or actually why the hurt or why the pain. Beautiful mentor of mine, Gabriel Mate, talks about that a lot. Not why the addiction, but why the pain. We can look at the hurt, and we can look at the if you want to go for a buzzword in this day and age, the trauma, and we can get in and under that and start to release the trapped energy and trapped emotions associated with the hurt and the pain. Then we actually start to create the space between what we were always leaning on and the version of self we've wanted to become. We don't have that craving to lean on that, because we can also start to instill these mindful and spiritual tools in which we start to fill up our cup and self-regulate from within rather than from external means.
Yes, because I love what you said. I wrote it down earlier. You said, we're often in this world. And I think that I think let's unpack really what we're talking about when we talk about addiction first, perhaps. And for anyone listening who's thinking, oh, well, I've never done Coke, or I don't have an issue with alcohol. If you can't get off your phone for scrolling, or you can't turn off that Netflix show because you have to get to the end of it 3 days straight, or you can't not consume a lot of shit that you don't need, or you can't not watch porn, or you can't not constantly check in with your friends or your partner or your kids, or be of service in, excessive ways that are actually beyond your own wants and needs, then, we might kindly suggest, and certainly food, I think, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, is alongside alcohol and probably social media, the top three, primary addictions that we have. So moving on from that, if we can accept that, so, you know what, and I think actually probably beyond that, the bigger addiction is even just achievement and, seeking approval in others, right? But when you said that we're seeking external solutions to an internal problem, I think that beautifully nails it on the head, and kind of unpacks what you just said. The thing is not the thing. We need to be curious, not about why the addiction, but why the pain that we're numbing out, essentially. So when you look back at your own life, what was the pain that you were numbing out? Because you mentioned you had patterns of destruction prior to weed. So I'm just curious. Obviously, the heartbreak, you mentioned it when you were 19, and obviously, heartbreak is a funny thing because literally it's talking about a broken heart, and that's, in a biological level, that would mean we're dead, right? If we look at it there. So I can understand, that may simply have been it, but I know you've done a lot of growth work, Drew. So I'm just curious, when you have looked at your own reality and you've unpacked the pain beneath, the symptom, what's come up for you, just as a means of sharing with people that, a lot of people, I've got so many things I want to share, so I'll try not to scatter it, and I'll try to pull it in, but there is a lot here. And I think for the listeners, there's a lot for them to recognize around, it's all about degrees and spectrum, right? Degrees of trauma and spectrum, and degrees of addiction. But really, so for you personally.
Yeah, to add to that, to start with, just looping back a little bit, is when you said, it's not just the drugs and the alcohol. And I talk a lot about, like, in my mind right now, addiction and distraction are synonymous. They're the one and the same. So it's just like, what are you using to distract from yourself? What's your thing? What's your vice? What's your crutch? It's the same thing. Like, anything that you're using to just check out from self, that's a problem. It's an issue. Back to my sort of hurt or my pain. I mean, it can be really nuanced, right? Like, it can be really subtle. Not everybody has to have these ginormous capital T traumas. I never experienced sexual abuse. I never experienced abuse of any kind as a kid. I had a really extremely beautiful, loving, nurturing upbringing. And if you want to get, I guess, super, not sort of woo-woo, but to really go deep, is that, in essence, we start trapping these energies and emotions as kids, as babies. We can trap this stuff in utero.
Yes.
We can take on board our mother's energy when we're still, inside. And these energies that we start to take on board, we start to create frameworks for how we start to see life. We start to recreate these frameworks and instill these beliefs within us, held within these trapped emotions and trapped energies. To go to something that's a little bit more understandable is, some places I've been revisiting recently. I work with a really powerful somatic psychotherapist, and something that's been coming up for us recently is actually around, I must have been about 6 years old. I cut a kid's hair in class in primary school, and as like a punishment, the teacher at the time sat me in the middle of the class to, like, make a spectacle of me and pretended to give me a haircut as if to shame me. But in that moment, that was a very traumatizing experience as a little kid, and it's created different frameworks and beliefs within me as to how I started to show up in life.
Yes.
Not lovable, abandonment, all sorts of different things. There's really, like, sort of nuanced patterns. So I guess to touch on that is, like, it can be really different for everybody. But for people that are listening right now, that are like, their existence is as simple as just wanting to put down a vice, is that stuff comes later down the path. Like what people really need to nail from the start is literally just the foundational principles and the tools that are going to help them put down the shit. And I talk about that.
Yeah, what would you suggest there? If someone, so say someone's listening and they're like, okay, well, do I have, so before we get to that, because I'd love you to get to those tangibles about putting down the vice, but let's say someone, bless, I can think of lots of people who'd be listening to this in some level of denial or quote unquote justification, where it's like, well, I don't think I have a problem with alcohol because I only drink after the kids go to bed. So what do we classify as an addiction? Because I know people that I've spoken with in the past have said, well, an addiction is anything you can't not do, even if you want to not do it. Whereas a bad habit is something that you do, but if you really chose to stop, you could stop. So is someone, how will they know? Because we might have things that don't serve us, habits or behaviors, but what classifies it as an addiction versus just a bad habit or something that doesn't serve us at the moment?
Yeah, and there's spectrums, right? There's different levels of help I would apply for someone who's been on heroin for 10 years than someone who just wants to stop eating a packet of Tim Tams every night. And I think really all that matters, like literally all that matters in that moment is like, do you want to stop repeating that same pattern of behavior that doesn't serve you?
I'm so sorry.
Right?
But I tried to cover the microphone for that sneeze. It was coming out. There was no, I'm not one of these people that can do a quiet little sneeze. So that was actually as quiet as it gets. Sorry, team.
I'm all about everyone being in the full experience of anything
yes,
through their body.
Yes. But I actually love what you said there, Drew. So we'll just tie it back in case my sneeze covered it up there. And I think you nailed it again, is it's anything that you want to not do that you don't seem to be able to stop, or within yourself is stealing some of your life force, right? Like we know, as you said before, you just know, even though you're playing it out and you might be singing the song or, fitting in with people or almost being playful around it, a deeper part of you, your soul, as you mentioned earlier, is calling to you and saying, hey, we got to stop this. So
you indulge in that practice, you genuinely afterwards would probably feel guilt and remorse sprinkled with a little bit of shame.
Yes, so that's a great check-in too. So if after the event, if during the event you're all bliss balls, but after that you're like, and there's guilt and shame, well, regardless of whether you want to classify it as an addiction or not, there's definitely an opportunity to reframe, rewire, and change that pattern, either so as to remove just the guilt and shame if it really isn't a harmful experience, or to look at it. So what would be the top tips that you have that you as an expert in this space suggest people do if they've got a vice, whether it's food, alcohol, porn, social media? What do we do to kind of change the cycle?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first sort of 3 steps of the process is number one, just admitting that there's something that you want to change, admitting there's a problem. That's everything. That's that separation between yourself and denial that you're speaking about before.
Yes.
Just speaking it into existence, even speaking it to another human. There's so much freedom in that. I remember the first time I sharing at a support group, and I was like, I am an addict, 100%. I was just like, oh, what a weight off my shoulders.
Yeah. but is there also, Drew, because I found this to be true with addiction in my life, even though, and I agree, it is a weight off once shared, the opening to share it, the admission, as you say, that can actually be the biggest part, the biggest boulder to shift in the first place, because once it's spoken, it's real. And so much of us is in resistance to declaring it or claiming it as a truth, because of what we make it mean, and because of the judgment that we think they may have, or whatever the reason might be. I know for myself that the hardest part in my own healing came in confession, just owning it and expressing it to someone else. I knew I had a problem and I was happy to say that in my own head, but to say it to another was a whole nother level. Yeah, but as you say, it brought freedom and it created the change. So I think that's a great first step.
Totally. One of the most purest forms of and easiest ways to release yourself from a lot of these emotions, or just as simple as guilt and shame, is to speak it and be witnessed in that. Powerful. It's extremely powerful. But yeah, step one, I think, really is just admitting there's a problem, admitting there's something that you want to change. Sort of step two is really just sowing the seeds of hope, like looking around you, other people that are sharing similar experience to me, that have overcome this, that have beaten, that have won this battle. Because for a lot of people in that experience, it can feel very lonely. It can feel very isolating. You think you're the black sheep. You think you're the odd one out. Feel broken. You're like, what the hell is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing the thing I promised myself I'd never do again?
Yeah.
And then sort of step three in that process is going and finding some humans that have walked that path before you, knowing that yes, yes, the answers come from within, but the guidance comes from outside of self. If you were able to do this and nail this and conquer this with operating from your own consciousness, you would have done it already. Often we have to go and learn the tools and the tips and tricks of the trade from someone who has walked this path before us. And then in terms of tangible tools, I mean, shit, I could give you a ton. I mean, I guess I would love to offer access to just a free group for anyone that wants to come and learn a few basic tools. But for me, some of the most important things are just daily rituals, daily practices that bring you back to self, creating space to learn how to be with and feel your emotions. Creating space is massive. Self-love is such a huge part of this journey. Learning to love ourselves again.
So Drew, I'm going to just summarize because I think that was really beautiful. The first thing you said is just admitting it or sharing it with someone. The second was seeds of hope, which is really seeing that other people have moved through it, seeing that other people can live without it. So seeking, the way I would frame that is seeking evidence so that you can start to build some beliefs to support that it's potentially or is possible for you to live in a different way. And then the third you said is essentially, the way I'm hearing that, was ask for help, or find the right person to support you on the journey, and maybe commit to a journey is part of that as well, I imagine.
Nailed it.
And we'll of course link to you, and people can find your free group. And definitely, if you are in the grips of addiction and you want help, then I think Drew would be an amazing ally to you, and you should definitely reach out, join his free groups. And obviously he runs lots of programs and coaches people through this. So we'll link to all of that. Something I wanted to touch on that you just said about daily practices, which, if we go back to the story that you mentioned, well, not the story, your story from earlier, where you were sharing that you dropped into, after your first rehabilitation or your second or wherever it was, a level of complacency, you said, where you weren't being conscious of the new choices. And I'd love us to unpack that, because I feel like people really do beat themselves up. And, I speak and work with people around sabotage and the cycle there and the nature of it. But I think a lot of people feel like, well, I did the thing, whether it's food, I ate better for 3 days and then I just fell off the horse, and I'm obviously just shit at this change thing. And, like whatever it is, however long it is, whether it's months and then we go backwards or something like that. And it always blows my mind that if we were seeking mastery with golf, or weightlifting or Spanish or any other bloody skill on the planet, we would be like, well, you can't just do it for 3 days and expect to be a genius at it. And you can't just expect to do it even for 3 months. It's kind of like bathing. You got to commit to this being something that you practice and participate in on the regular, so that it becomes a part of your way of being. And yet around, say, health or mindfulness or patience, or just, us as humans becoming more express versions of us as humans, we seem to think like we should get it in a one go wonder. And look, and I do it too, but I just always think it's really hilarious. And so I'm wondering, when you say about daily practices and rituals, it really is a consistent lifelong journey, isn't it? Not in like a trapped prison way, but we need to be conscious in the creation of our lives all the time, because we're living all the time, and distraction, particularly in this day and age, is readily available.
But Marina, I want it now.
Yeah, right.
I want it now. We live in a world of instant gratification.
True.
I don't wait. I want this all now. Can't you give me the quick fix? Isn't there a pill that can make this all go away? This is the problem. This is what's been ingrained into our society.
So how do we work against this impatience?
again, it's a practice. This is a the words that are coming through are daily reprieve. Like this is a daily practice. This is medicine on a consistent daily basis, and this stuff takes daily action.
Hmm.
And asked me the other day, I think we we're talking about morning routine, and she said, "Do you take a day off?" I'm like, "No, I don't, because this is my armor. This is like my spiritual bodyguard that I put on in the morning. This is the level of consistency required to keep some of these things at bay." And they speak about in some of the rooms that I first started in as support groups, they talk about one day at a time.
Hmm.
Just can I do this today? Can I show up for myself today? It's a really beautiful tool just to keep coming back to. So when we drop into this like lifelong commitment, it can be really overwhelming.
Yes.
Really overwhelming. It's like, can I choose myself today?
Hmm.
Can I show up for myself for the next 24 hours? Can I not eat the packet of Tim Tams today? Can I reach out for support today?
Hmm.
You can do that on a daily basis. And look, there's some days, I still have days. Some days I wake up and I'm like, this shit.
Yeah.
Plug me back in. And you know what? They're few and far between nowadays, and it doesn't last very long. And I remind myself that I'm where I'm at today because the only thing I did differently between the first time I was in rehab and the second was consistent daily action.
Hmm. And the thing about it too is it's often I have found in helping people particularly transform, say, their health, but even money or whatever it is, any transformation, if we focus on what we focus on expands. So if we focus on what we're not allowed, the packet of Tim Tams, or we focus on what we can't have, the alcohol, and that suddenly becomes all that we see in the realm of our perspective, right? Because we're literally, the subconscious mind doesn't hear don't, doesn't hear can't, it's going to want it more and more. And I think this is a big way in which we actually don't support ourselves to create change. Because if instead of focusing on what we can't have and what we're not doing anymore, which is, just to really drive this home, actually focusing more on it, then it's about cultivating this power of intention, as many of the wisest of the wise have shared, and focus on what sits in the realm of the choice or the consequences of the new choices. So I focus on feeling energized. I focus on having space, having time, feeling calm. And then the more we focus on those things, even if they're still growing as seedlings, they then expand. And energy begets energy begets energy, and momentum becomes our friend in the best of ways, doesn't it? Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And it's like literally the essence of manifestation, right? It's like, what do I want? What do I want? Not what don't I want? What do I want? Who do I want to become? One of the first exercises I do with a lot of my clients is to write a letter to their future self. Like, who are you going to be as a result of putting down the bullshit that continues to get in your way? What does that version of self even look like? How are you showing up for yourself? What do you want to create? Not who do you not want to be? We don't want to perpetuate what you don't want, because just like you said, guess what? You'll continue to bring into your existence. So if we can reframe, if we can see it in our mind's eye, we can start to recreate it in our reality, right? So yeah, just getting really clear on what we do want and envisioning that every morning is such a powerful practice.
So what do you include in your morning routine?
Oh, my absolute non-negotiables. My morning routine probably changes every couple of months. So I like to keep it exciting. I don't want it to actually become a routine. I want to keep
a Groundhog Day, yeah.
Totally. So my non-negotiables are no phone. My apps will turn off at about 9. They don't turn on again until 9 in the morning. I go into I usually write out, depending on what I'm doing in my life at the time, a series of commitments, just things that I'm working on for myself, and I'll speak them into existence. My absolute non-negotiables are prayer and meditation. When I say prayer, it's literally just a little conversation with the universe and giving thanks. So that's an element of gratitude. Yeah. So I'll just go into a flow state of giving thanks, just close down my eyes and like, thank you, God, for beautiful, sexy, able, capable body. Thank you for the use of all of my limbs. Like, what a gift that I have a functional body and use of all of my senses. Thank you for my amazing car. Thank you for where I live. And I'll just free roll and I'll speak not loud. So I feel my vibration lifting in that moment, right?
Yes.
And then I'll drop in and I'll do between 10 and 15 minutes of meditation. But I do that in silence. I don't use a guided app or anything. That I want to be really clear. Like I actually believe a lot of guided meditations can be just another form of distraction from self. So if I can just be in stillness and be in the presence of me, I might hold a mantra, and usually it's just I love myself, and sort of continue to come back to that mantra if I feel my mind's wandering. Like those are my non-negotiables. Then there's just elements of like, I've got a sort of health drink I have in the morning, maybe some exercise. I'm actually exercising in the afternoon these days, but putting some movement of some kind in your morning practice is really powerful. I love to acknowledge myself or celebrate myself. So I might just speak 3 things that I want to acknowledge and honor myself for, or how I'm showing up. These things, energetically, I'm raising my vibration right from the minute I wake up. If I'm waking up and I'm grabbing my phone and I'm scrolling through social media or looking at the news, I'm automatically fed into a state of fear or comparison.
Well, it's reactive, isn't it? You're immediately reacting to the world as opposed to creating, cultivating, and claiming your power, which is that of the creatrix. I actually, I really appreciate you sharing the tangibles there, because yours is very similar to mine, and it's actually nice, to hear. I know men and women are not distinctly different, but I really love that you're saying, affirming yourself and using "I love you" statements. And I too are big on gratitude as a vibrational raiser, and it was just really lovely to hear that really works for you. And can you explain why the vibrational state is so important? Because I agree with you, but why is that you're like, okay, if I start the day high vibration, why is that important?
Yeah, it's everything. It's, for anyone listening, if you want to go and look up Richard Dawkins' sort of map of consciousness and check in with yourself on the scale of, it ranges, his work anyway, ranges from 0 to 1,000. And, these, if you want to get a little bit more woo-woo, emotions, basically they hold an energy. They hold an energetic charge. So if, the emotions down the lower end of the scale are things like anger and guilt and shame, like right down the bottom, they hold a low vibration. They hold an extremely low frequency. And the more we can climb the ladder of consciousness and put ourselves into a state of joy or peace, or something just as simple as like acceptance and things like love, and even encroaching enlightenment, the more our entire frame of this planet and existence shifts. So if I can set my sort of energetic container as high up that scale as I possibly can from the minute I wake up, then no matter what is thrown to me that day, I can only come down a few notches. Because if I'm setting myself up for sort of failure from the minute I wake up, and I'm feeding myself from a state of fear or comparison, then I'm in a low vibrational state from the minute I wake up, and I'll carry that out through the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
The moment I'm sort of checking in with myself, like, what am I doing to nourish, fuel, and feed my sort of energetic vibration throughout the day, to hold me in those higher frequencies, to hold me in those higher vibrations, those higher energetic emotional states, and also to get, not to take away from some of those experiences. It's there's nothing wrong with dropping into some of these lower vibrations or emotions, but it's knowing what to do when you're in them as well, to allow them to move through you in a way that honors yourself. Energy or emotion is just energy in motion. It needs an escape. It needs a way to flow through our body. So we also need to sort of learn how to let these things, like, sadness or anger to actually flow through us, so we can release it for good and then step up into these higher vibrations as a result.
Yeah, I love that. And I think also I would love society to start to realize that we don't reach higher frequency by vibrating higher. Often, well, we can obviously, but if guilt and shame, well, as you said, shame is the lowest frequency, it's 20. Guilt I think is 40. And so if we go and do the inner work, and we allow these feelings, as you say, instead of suppressing, repressing them, but actually allow them out, because the feeling is the healing, then actually releasing the weight of the stone just lets the balloon float up, because you are at your essence a high vibrational creature. It's the things that we do on the daily that erode, or as in my sovereignty work we teach, we're giving our power away constantly. So if we just stopped holding all these rocks that we said we'd hold for everybody outside of ourselves, guess what? We'd be vibrating freaking high anyway. So it's not like high vibe takes work. It actually is like so easy in some ways, because if we just work to unfold all the weight or the heaviness. And for anyone listening who might have heard Drew describe that and kind of go, oh, that sounds a bit woo, and they're not open to quantum physics being as tangible as any of the other sciences, I really want you to pause and notice that you are actually dealing with this scale every day. When you walk into a room, you have a conversation, you feel heavy. You just dealt with the scale of consciousness. When you go outside and the sun hits your skin and suddenly you feel expanded, you just dealt with it again. So you're walking, breathing, you are a part of it. We're all vibrational elements inside of this soup that we share together. So I think I really love that when you're looking at your morning routine, you're bringing that awareness of just vibrating higher.
Yeah.
Now,
we're not
I'd
taught
love
it at school, right? Like we're not taught any of this at school. We're not ever taught any of this until usually we hit some sort of rock bottom and go looking for more. That's what drives me crazy. We're not taught how to just feel. We're not taught how to just be in the experience of life. What we're very much taught, how to do is, what we're modeled is this sort of, if you want to take it on a little bit of a tangent, is this whole framework our society is built on, sort of consumerism and capitalism, and that we need something, we need all of these things from outside of ourselves to make us feel whole and complete. I need the car, I need the house, I need the woman, I need the perfect man, I need the kids, I need the white picket fence, I need the Botox, I need the whatever it is, like
all the likes and the followers, or the recognition.
And when really, like, all we have to learn how to do is come back to self.
Yeah, I agree. Amen. So you mentioned earlier that, a traditional approach to addiction is to treat it like a disease. And, you also mentioned, and this is something that I came to realize around my own addiction that I developed post-divorce with my bulimia and my eating disorder, is that you really see it more as a coping mechanism. And so, one is kind of disease, feels very heavy and needs to be medicated and fixed and healed. And coping mechanism feels more like, for me, it's a choice. And often our coping mechanisms can be effective or ineffective. And the question is it effective or ineffective? So can you just kind of wrap up for us, how we've been viewing addiction, and really what we should, or how we could be viewing it, and why it's important to maybe shift not only the stigma, but our awareness of what addiction is?
Yeah, I guess it's just really important to see that, to start with, addiction or distraction is everywhere, and that there's spectrums on that scale. There's not actually too many there's a lot of similarities, I should say, in crossovers between the junkie sitting in the gutter with the needle hanging out of his arm and the workaholic.
Yes.
One's just a lot more functional. You know what? I actually think, in my mind, I genuinely feel more grateful to have been the one that picked a vice that took me out of the game a hell of a lot quicker. Because it allowed me to get to a point where I could draw a line in the sand and go, you know what, this isn't working.
Oh, Drew, can I just jump in here? Because I was literally having this conversation with someone earlier today around a book I'm writing. And what I was saying to her is, I feel really passionate because the people that I know that I'm here to specifically help, and you mentioned the word complacency, and I think that's a really big thing. But when your destructive behavior is affirmed by society and affirmed by your own belief structures, you're actually in a really you're in a much more risky place to put that addiction down. Whereas when everybody around you is going, hey mate, that's a really fucked pattern right there, hey mate, that's a really shit pattern, part of you, even though of course that can feed, you know, beliefs of I'm not good enough, and we can hold them for many other reasons beyond just straight up biochemical, you know, desires of the body and the mind. But I really appreciate what you're saying there, because sometimes when universe works for us and takes us so low or so far across, or just implodes or explodes our reality, we are taken literally out of the quote unquote game, which people might think is a negative, but I agree with you, it's a positive, because once you've lived outside of the realm of what you thought you had to be, you know, accepted and received in the world, you're now free on a level that most people will never know. And so then you can come back in and play the game in your own way. And from a place of truth and alignment. So I think that's massive. And some, we could argue, who's to say, you know, the junkie on the side of the road who's currently blissed out and not stressed or whatever else. And obviously it's not healthy. And I'm not saying that that's the be all and end all, but someone who's revering busyness and who's revering, you know, keeping up with the Joneses and who's living beyond their means, that is a really powerful cycle affirmed by society to get out of. You know, it's a double-edged sword, because you literally believe that it's the right way to live life.
100%. Yeah, that's it. And it's a really fine line, you know. Yeah, it's like who's actually who's more hurt in that experience, or who is
More free, or
who's they're both really just existing.
Yeah, who's more effective, who's more happy, you know, like, and these are the things, like, really, because I think busyness is one of the biggest addictions we have, and I can put my hand up 100% for falling into that trap a lot too. So
what can feed, this is something I could touch on a little bit, is it feeds this cortisol loop. And a friend of mine that you might be interested to talk to anyway, her sort of theory, and which I'm sitting with and really resonate a lot, is that we're actually more addicted to the come down than we are the high. We're actually more addicted to that stress and the stress hormone, which is cortisol, pumping through our body, and receptors have become so attuned to that for a lot of people, the addiction or the high actually just gets them into the space to drop them down into that low, in which they can sit in that experience of self-loathing, self-pity, stress, cortisol pumps. The body goes, oh, here it is again, I'm getting my fix.
Yeah, well, when that makes a lot of sense to me, because when I teach sabotage cycles, where we sabotage is to affirm a belief structure. And so that come down, and again, if you're not watching this on video, you can't see all the hand signals, but as we come down and we spiral through that, you know, that cycle of doom, what's actually happening is our system is going, oh, see, told you I was right. And now we feel safe. And so all of that, you know, biochemical as well as, you know, subconscious affirming is really just affirming that we're safe, which we're mostly addicted to, right? That realization. So I would love to chat to her, and we can talk offline about that. But yeah, I can see how and where that would play out very strongly. So, you know, if you had a message that we could put in a bottle and give to everyone on the planet around addiction or around life, anything you've learned, or if everyone, like literally this whole podcast got deleted except for what you're about to say next, what would be the one thing that you're like, hey team, listen up, this is really important, blah.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Oh, I think it would just be to know that you are loved and to come back to self at all moments. You know, we are literally the only constant in our life. You and your breath are all you have. It is the only constant. Everything else will leave. That's just a given.
Yep.
And when we can learn how to be in the most beautiful, powerful relationship to self that we can possibly cultivate, and learn to teach out and treat ourselves like a lover, like a friend, like a best friend, then we start to learn how to be in the full experience of life. We learn how to truly feel. We learn how to truly be in our body. We learn how to self-regulate. And we start to create a vessel and a relationship with ourselves. We don't actually need anything else from outside of ourselves. And that anything that we do accumulate from outside of self is just a beautiful added bonus to enjoy this one precious little fucking life that we've been gifted with.
Mm.
And that, literally anything is possible. If you can think it, you can create it.
Mm.
And just to know that, I guess ultimately everything let that land, everything in your life is happening for you, not
Mm.
especially
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And often the universe will work in seemingly aggressive or quote unquote negative ways, but really I think the universe is very often just trying to save us from ourselves. And
talk about is the language of the universe or the language of our body. And often it's in this chaos that we have the opportunity to learn some of the most profound lessons about ourselves if we're willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
If we're willing to really listen and receive and integrate what has been exposed to us in that moment.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that a lot of us don't actually know how to do that, or we don't see this as a frame of this is all happening for us. So therefore, what's the lesson? And instead, we experience the hurt and the pain, and then we go to our coping mechanisms. So
Yes.
we miss what the universe is trying to expose for us in that experience. And therefore, we don't integrate the lesson, and therefore we continue to repeat the cycle. And if you want to take this a step further, this is playing out on a individual level as much as it's playing out on a global level. All the sort of chaos playing out in the world right now, COVID and Black Lives Matter and bushfires and rah-rah. It's just the universe asking more of us. It's asking humanity just to be better. But again, in the moment, in the time, in the experience, we might link arms and unify and kumbaya and pray and meditate. And then it passes and we get complacent. And we don't actually integrate or embody what the universe was trying to expose to us in that moment. Therefore, it continues to cycle.
Yeah, it comes back around and it says, I love you so much. Let's do this again. And let me try help you wake the fuck up. So yeah, I agree. Totally agree. 100%. Quick fire questions. If there was one book or one resource that totally changed your life or helped you in this place or space, it could be a course or a program or a book, what would you shout out to? And we'll link to in the show notes.
A book. Look, there's so many. A book or
a couple is fine. You can give us a couple.
For me right now, what I use for a lot of my clients is a beautiful book called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. I can't remember the author, sorry. But yeah, it's a beautiful little journey. It's a very simple read and a very practical. It's got practical little tools through it.
Cool. We'll link
that. Awesome. Yeah, that's an amazing resource. I love that book a lot. Anyone that wants to explore, I guess, addiction a little more, go and get Russell Brand's book on recovery. It's also a really, really powerful resource. He's basically just reframed the 12 steps into a way that's sort of more mainstream, which is cool, as only Russell Brand could do.
Yes.
What I'm reading A Happy Pocket Full of Money.
And you're liking it?
It is next level. It's
good.
A culmination of like 13 different money wealth story books I've probably ever read in one form.
Awesome. We'll link to all of those. Thanks for sharing. And now, what would be the one thing that you would say to people to maximize their energy today? What could they do? What would you suggest they do?
Oh, just go and move your body.
Yes.
Go and exercise. Go for a run.
Move.
Go for a swim. Go and slow down and go and ground in some nature. Go and plant your feet in the sand or in the bush and sit under a tree for half an hour and just be with you.
Cool. And what would you suggest they do for elevating their sense of empowerment? What could they do today to feel better or more empowered?
Look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself how amazing you are.
That can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people. So yes, go and do that. Eye gaze with yourself and meet yourself there. Yeah.
But yeah, empowerment. Just know that, you can literally do and be anything you want, and just speak to yourself in that way. Even to take yourself on a date. I love getting people to take themselves on a date. Go and treat yourself like you would treat your girlfriend or your boyfriend.
Mm. And what about for expression? What would be your number one rapid fire tip for in elevating your expression, your truth into the world?
For me, it usually comes from owning your story.
Mm.
So, I talk about pain to purpose a lot, turning your pain into your purpose.
Mm.
So, I don't know what that looks like, but there's a lot of power that can be had in just sharing your story.
Mm.
So, if someone, it's edgy, but it's liberating as hell. If you haven't done so and you feel like there's medicine to be had by speaking that to other humans, if someone's going to learn something from your story and your experience, then that is actually a gift, and you're robbing everyone else of that experience and the learning that I guess that is held in your story. And in this day and age, we have so many tools that we can reach so many different humans. So it might just be sharing it with a couple of friends to help, liberate yourself in that experience. But shit, do it live. Live Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Go the extra mile and just speak to anyone that's willing to listen exactly the sort of the path you've walked, and notice how many people love on you in that experience, and that will actually probably have walked a super similar path.
Yeah. There is connection in that for sure. Drew, thank you so much for today. This has been a very juicy conversation, and I'm sure for the listeners, just full of insights and inspiration, but also some really tangible nuggets. So is there anything else that you really wanted to make sure that we covered or share?
No, I feel pretty complete.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Thank you so much for who you be in the world and the work you do in the world, and definitely for your time today and sharing your wisdom and your story with us. I deeply appreciate you, and I see you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.